Okay, so you want to own a movie studio. You picture the iconic gate, the sprawling backlot, the sound stages where magic is made. You imagine greenlighting blockbuster films, discovering the next big star, walking the red carpet, and collecting golden statues. You're not just building a business, you're shaping culture itself, one frame at a time. It sounds like the ultimate fusion of art and commerce. Here's the problem. Almost none of that is how this business actually works. The real business of a movie studio is a brutal, high-stakes game of financial engineering built on an accounting system so strange it's become a running joke. And it has almost nothing to do with whether a movie is actually good. The industry is famous for producing films that lose $100 million, yet it's run by some of the wealthiest executives on the planet. So how does a business that celebrates failure on such a spectacular scale create so much wealth? That's the entire question we're going to answer. And the answer is a secret hidden in plain sight, far from the glamour of the silver screen. Let's start with what you see on the surface. To operate at the major league level, you're competing with the Big Five: Disney, Warner Brothers, Universal, Paramount, and Sony. These aren't just companies. They are global distribution machines. The product they sell, a blockbuster movie, is one of the most expensive products in the world. A modern superhero film or sci-fi epic routinely costs between $200 and $350 million just to produce. That's the budget for the cast, the director, the crew, and the mind-bending special effects that fill the screen. For that price, you could buy a fleet of private jets or a small skyscraper. But here's the first thing nobody tells you. That massive production budget is just the cost of admission. It doesn't include the single largest expense that can make or break a film: marketing. The global marketing budget for a tentpole film can easily run another $150 to $200 million. All those trailers, TV spots, billboards, and social media campaigns are a separate, astronomical cost. So your $250 million movie is now a $450 million bet before a single ticket is sold. And even before you spend that first dollar on production, you're bleeding cash on something called development. Studios spend millions every year buying scripts, hiring writers, and developing projects that never, ever get made. This is development hell, a graveyard of abandoned ideas that costs a fortune but produces zero revenue. It's a fixed, hidden cost of doing business just to find the one project you hope will work. Add to that the overhead of the studio lot itself, acres of prime real estate, sound stages, offices, security, and union staff, and you're running a machine that costs millions every single week, whether you're filming or not. So, you've spent nearly $500 million. The movie is finished. Now you need to get it in front of people. This is where the entire financial structure of Hollywood begins to get weird. The money a movie makes at the box office, the number you see in the headlines, $1 billion worldwide, is not the money the studio gets to keep. Not even close. That money, the box office gross, is split with the movie theaters, the exhibitors. In the domestic market, the US and Canada, the studio gets to keep, on average, about 50% of the ticket price. In international markets, that share is often lower, sometimes closer to 40%, because they have to go through local distributors. So, your movie that made $1 billion worldwide might only return about $450 million to the studio. And remember, you spent $450 million to make and market it. You've broken even. After all that work, all that risk, you've made nothing. This is where the entire game changes. Because the way a studio really makes money has less to do with profit and more to do with controlling the flow of cash. Here's where it gets interesting. The studio isn't just the production company. In most cases, it's also the distributor. And the distributor gets paid first before anyone else. Before the actors, before the investors, and even before the studio itself gets to recoup its own production costs. A studio will charge itself a distribution fee. This is a standard, non-negotiable line item in the budget, typically between 25% and 35% of all the money the film brings in. Think about what that means. On that $450 million that came back from theaters, the studio's distribution arm immediately takes, say, 30% off the top. That's $135 million in pure, guaranteed revenue for the studio, booked before any other expenses are paid. The movie might be a financial failure. The distribution business is always profitable. This is the core of so-called Hollywood accounting. It's a system designed to ensure that a film shows as little net profit as possible on paper, because net profits have to be shared with actors, directors, and writers who have points in the movie. By loading the film's expenses with massive internal fees for distribution, marketing, and overhead, the studio can make it so a wildly successful film never officially turns a profit. One of the most famous examples is Forrest Gump, a movie that made over $670 million at the box office in the 90s. The author of the book it was based on, who had a deal for a share of the net profits, was famously told the film had still not made a profit and he was owed nothing. The studio isn't selling a product. It's operating a toll booth, and it collects a toll on every single dollar that flows through the system long before that dollar ever gets counted as profit. But even that isn't the whole story. The theatrical run is just the beginning. It's the loud, flashy launch party for the real money-making machine, which runs for decades. This machine has several parts. First, there's home entertainment, Blu-ray, DVD, and digital sales and rentals. The manufacturing and distribution costs are a tiny fraction of the revenue, making this a high-margin business. Then comes the golden river of licensing. This is where true fortunes are made. The studio sells the rights for the movie to be shown on television networks, on airplanes, and, most importantly, on streaming services like Netflix or its own service, like Disney+. These are deals worth hundreds of millions, sometimes billions of dollars, for a library of content that has already been paid for. And then there's the biggest profit center of them all for franchise films, merchandising. The first Star Wars film wasn't just a movie, it was a 2-hour advertisement for toys, lunchboxes, bed sheets, and video games. George Lucas famously took a pay cut as director in exchange for keeping the merchandising rights, a deal that made him a billionaire. For a company like Disney, the revenue from Marvel or Star Wars merchandise can, over time, eclipse the box office revenue of the films themselves. The movie isn't the business. The movie is the launchpad for creating intellectual property, or IP. Here's the structural risk that runs through this entire industry today. The reliance on this IP-driven franchise model has become an addiction. Studios are no longer in the business of making a diverse slate of films. They're in the business of managing a handful of multi-billion-dollar universes. The pressure to make every single film a global event is immense. A single flop, like The Flash for Warner Brothers, doesn't just lose money, it damages the perceived value of the entire interconnected universe and can derail years of future planning. At the same time, the streaming wars have completely changed the landscape. Before, a movie had multiple chances to make money through different windows: theaters, then rentals, then home video, then cable TV. Each window was a separate revenue stream. Streaming services like Netflix and the studio's own platforms like Disney Plus collapse all of that into a single monthly subscription fee. This creates a huge problem. While it provides predictable revenue, it can devalue the films themselves. A $300 million blockbuster now sits on the same digital shelf as a $20 million drama, all included in the same $15 monthly fee. This is the existential battle every major studio is fighting right now. How to monetize their most expensive products in a world that expects unlimited content for a flat fee. So, after all of that, how does owning a studio actually work as a business? The honest answer is that a modern movie studio is not a standalone business at all. It's one division inside a massive, diversified global conglomerate. The optimistic scenario is Disney. You own a studio that produces blockbuster IP like Marvel, Star Wars, and Pixar. The movies drive a flywheel of synergistic profits. A new Frozen movie doesn't just sell tickets, it sells merchandise at the Disney store, drives attendance at theme parks, inspires new cruise ship experiences, and keeps people subscribed to Disney+. In this model, the studio is the creative engine for a much, much larger corporate machine. The film itself almost doesn't need to be profitable, as long as it successfully fuels all the other divisions. The realistic and far more common scenario is a constant struggle for relevance. You are spending hundreds of millions to produce films for a fragmented global audience whose attention is being pulled in a dozen different directions. You are locked in a brutal arms race with other studios and tech giants like Apple and Amazon who are also pouring billions into content. You might score a huge hit one year, but you are only ever one or two disastrous flops away from a corporate write-down, mass layoffs, and a change in leadership. The game is not about making movies. The game is not about making movies. It's about creating and owning intellectual property that can be monetized across every conceivable platform for the next 50 years. The glamour of Hollywood, the Oscars, the art of cinema, that's the story they tell the public. From the inside, a movie studio is a single, interconnected financial system. The movie on the screen isn't really the product. It is the incredibly expensive, high-risk entry point into a machine built to extract profit from every corner of the culture long after the credits have rolled.